From 1878 to 1968, there were 71 lake captains that called Bayview, Wisconsin, on the shore of Lake Michigan, their home. While they lived here, they captained 195 different ships, from tugboats to schooners to steamships, in voyages that took them to every one of the Great Lakes. Join us now for another episode of Bayview, Town of Lake Captains, where we explore not only these captains, but also their ships, their homes, their families, and their lifetime of sailing adventures on the Great Lakes.
Hi everybody, welcome back to another episode of Bayview, Town of Lake Captains. Brought to you by the Historic Bayview Lake Captains Society, where we have a newsletter, a website, a YouTube channel, and a lot more. All for free. We have no dues. The only membership requirement is that you show an interest and watch whenever you want. So, welcome. Today I'm standing in front of the house of Captain James Sheehan. Now, Captain Sheehan, one of Bayview's 71 lake captains. Captain Sheehan sailed, before he moved here, sailed around the world at least twice, probably more, on the great sailing ships. They were the beautiful sailing ships of the late 19th century, before he came to Bayview. And he wasn't the only captain here to have done so. There are several of them. Anyway, James was one of them. After he moved to Bayview, he became a captain for the Milwaukee Fire Department's fireboats, and he was captain of, I think, two different ones. You'll see it in the video coming up. His two sons served in the First World War, and one was injured. So you veterans out there, World War I service members also lived here. So that's it for today. Hope you enjoyed James Sheehan. Special guy. As they all were, really. I'll see you next time. And remember, hats off to our Bayview Lake captains. Take care.
Welcome to another installment of Bayview, Town of Lake Captains, where we discuss the lives of the 71 different lake captains that once lived in Bayview, Wisconsin, during the late 19th and early 20th centuries in the age of sail and steam. This discussion will include their ships, their homes, their families, and their lifetime of sailing adventures on the Great Lakes. Here is the map of lake captains' homes in Bayview to show you where this episode takes place. Its location focuses primarily on the large green arrow. Today, we will be discussing the life of Captain James Sheehan, who lived in a house on Mound Street. Unbeknownst to passers-by, this house was once the home of not just a Bayview lake captain, but of a true sea captain of the highest order, who commanded sailing ships that circled the globe not once, but many times. These voyages included sailing around the treacherous and legendary Cape Horn at the bottom of South America, and the equally dangerous Cape of Good Hope at the bottom of the African continent. His spectacular exploits continued after arriving in Milwaukee and Bayview as well. These included saving many lives in the Third Ward from a disastrous fire and rescuing a drowning man in the Milwaukee River. Captain James A. Sheehan was born in November 1860 in Troy, New York. Both his parents, John and Bridget, were born in Ireland. He had 4 brothers, Thomas, William, John, and Patrick. He lived in Troy until his early 20s. The city of Troy is on the east side of the Hudson River that flows south all the way to New York City and ultimately the Atlantic Ocean. It's likely how he came to be a sailor. During this time he became captain of at least one sailing ship, name unknown. He had undoubtedly sailed aboard others in order to work his way up to captain, but these weren't Great Lakes ships. They were ships he sailed on the world's oceans, salt water. He made several astounding voyages while captain of these in the golden age of sail. So, before he came to Milwaukee, he was already a seasoned sea captain, a global sailor of the high seas. Perhaps even more amazing is he wasn't Bayview's only captain to have commanded sailing ships on the world's oceans. There are more episodes on this channel about other Bayview lake captains that did the same. Captain Sheehan first came to Milwaukee in 1884, at age 24. He's listed as a sailor living in the Third Ward from 1884 to 1888, ship unknown. However, he was likely crew on undoubtedly a ship homeported in Milwaukee that sailed the Great Lakes. He may even have been captain, given his background. Then, just 5 years later, in 1889, he is listed for the first time working as a, quote, pipeman number 4, unquote, for the Milwaukee Fire Department. This was likely his first job in the fire department, and with an ashore, traditional fire department engine unit at that. Because this was his first connection to the fire department, it's entirely possible this was to give him general exposure to the firefighting profession, in order to qualify for what he was really after, captain of a fireboat. This opportunity is confirmed just a few months later, when the fire department took delivery of its first ever fireboat in the spring of 1889. It had been specially built in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, for the Milwaukee Fire Department over that fall and winter of 1888 to 89. During this time, the fire department would have had to assemble a crew for it, and James Sheehan was one of those transferred. It was named the Cataract, and the fire department crew that operated it were named Engine Company 15. James Sheehan thus became a member of the first ever crew on Milwaukee's first ever fireboat. James Sheehan is another example along with 6 of Bayview's 8 fireboat captains that didn't start out in fireboats, but instead began by captaining ships on Great Lakes or the oceans. Only after this did they move over to fireboats, most likely for the stability it offered to them to be with their families. Lake captains were gone April through November, and rarely saw their families. 8 months of every year they were away from home, sailing on the lakes. So fireboats in Milwaukee's harbour offered a way for them to remain part of watercraft, but also to be home every night. That was undoubtedly a big part of the appeal. But it was still a dangerous job, no less dangerous than sailing the lakes at that point in history. Just between 1890 and 93, while he lived in 3 different locations in the 3rd Ward, and then Walker's Point, the fireboat Cataract, when James was a crewman aboard, is documented to have fought 6 major fires. Comments made by various authorities after these fires stated that if it hadn't been for the Cataract, the fires would not have been contained, and would have spread further to create more damage and loss of life. Chief among these was the disastrous 3rd Ward fire in 1892 that threatened to destroy Milwaukee. Captain Sheehan lived in the 3rd Ward at the time of this fire, though he wasn't yet married, so he may even have lost his own home or apartment in the blaze. In 1894, 2 years after the 3rd Ward fire, and while still a crewman on the Cataract, James Sheehan moved to Bayview for the first time, to 2218 South Woodward Street, living with his brother Patrick. The next year, 1895, 2 major things happened. First, he got married, and second, he took over as captain of the Cataract, Milwaukee's first fireboat. He remained living at 2218 South Woodward for 2 more years, through 1897. He made 2 more house moves in Bayview over the next 2 years, while captain of the Cataract. In 1898, he moved to 2208 South Alice Street. Then, in 1899, he moved to what would be his final home of his life, 2119 South Mound Street. All told, once he took over command of the Cataract in 1895, he would always remain a fireboat captain thereafter. His total years as a fireboat captain break down as follows. The Cataract, also known as Engine Company 15, 1895 to 1903. The James Foley, also known as Engine Company 17, 1904 to 1920. It was during his tenure captaining the James Foley, and while living at 2119 South Mound Street, that he saved the life of a drowning man. After 1920, he may have remained as captain of the Foley, or moved up into the administration of the Fire Department until his retirement in 1924. He and wife Jenny had gotten married on 4th of March, 1895, in Monroe, Wisconsin. Jenny van der Jagd was born in Wisconsin in 1867, and both her parents had immigrated from Holland. James and Jenny Sheehan had 7 children, 4 boys, John, James, Edward, and Cornelius, and 3 girls, Delia, Loretta, and Kathleen. It becomes clear that Captain Sheehan was heavily connected socially with the Milwaukee Fire Department, in addition to his employment there, by seeing how his children would become connected to it. Son Edward became a captain in the fire department. Daughter Kathleen married the assistant fire chief for the 5th District. Sons John and his younger brother James Jr., by 3 years, both served in the First World War. John's service is not recorded outside of U.S. Army channels, though it is known he became a sergeant, but James Jr.'s service is. He saw extensive action in France from the date he arrived in April 1918 through the end of the war in November 1918. In those 7 months, James Jr. fought in 4 major battles during July through September 1918: Château-Thierry, Saint-Mihiel, Argonne Forest, and the Second Battle of the Marne. During this period of fighting, James Jr. was seriously wounded and received the Purple Heart Medal for his injuries received in battle. After the war ended, he remained in France and, still at the rank of private, served as a railroad locomotive engineer for the U.S. Army, operating a train between Saint-Nazaire and Tours, France. The purpose of the train isn't known, but it was likely transporting U.S. Army soldiers back from the battlefields to waiting ships at Saint-Nazaire to take them home to America. However, after the war and his return home to 2119 South Mound Street, James appears to have never fully recovered from his battle wounds. Though he was officially registered as a disabled veteran with, quote, multiple disabilities, unquote, he continued on as best he could by taking a job from 1920 to 1930, working as a fireman for a railroad company, running a locomotive, as he had learned to do in France. But in 1940, he had to move to a U.S. Veterans Administration facility in Grant, Indiana, to receive full-time medical care and hospitalization. Son James Sheehan, Jr. died 7 years later at the hospital on 31st August 1947, age 51. He is buried at the Wood National Cemetery, adjoining the Veterans Administration Hospital in Milwaukee. After his retirement in 1924, Captain Sheehan remained at 2119 South Mound Street. He would ultimately live there for 44 years, and was active in the Retired Firemen's and Policemen's Association. Wife Jenny died in 1939. 4 years later, on 10th April 1943, Captain James A. Sheehan died. He is buried in Milwaukee's Holy Cross Cemetery. Jenny's burial location isn't recorded, but it's likely they're buried together. They had lived together and raised a family in Bayview for nearly 50 years. Thanks for watching. This photograph isn't about Bayview or its lake captains, but it's from the same era of Great Lakes maritime history. We thought we'd close with it for enjoyment, as it captures the spirit of the era. In addition, this channel and its matching website also plan to support various maritime history projects related to Bayview's lake captains. One of these is a plaque and marker with the captains' names and addresses on it, as part of the creation of the Bayview Lake Captains Historic District, which will be the first of its kind in America. If you would like to donate to support these projects, to include this and other markers honouring Bayview's lake captains, with 100% of all donations and contributions in all forms going to support them, please consider donating to us through the listings shown next. If, for some reason, we are unable to secure these markers, then all funds donated to this site will be given as a cash donation to the museum ship SS City of Milwaukee in Manistee, Michigan. That is the only surviving intact ship, once captained by at least 2 and likely 3 different Bayview lake captains. I'm Simon Stanhope, narrator for these episodes. Join us again soon for the next chapter of Bayview, Town of Lake Captains.